Just to give you a little background into Not Mass 2 and how this started, the kind of precursor to the Bower was a pop-up shop that Louisa and I did in 2015 to 2016 called Finishing Touch. And Finishing Touch was in a barber shop. And we invited Holly to come and do a performance there. I had known Holly's work for quite a few years. I think the first time I saw her perform was in a condemned council flat in East London. And the work that she does really sort of spoke to me as someone who has a kind of Irish Catholic background and studied art history. But what I was also really interested in is how she uses kind of elements and symbols and characters from contemporary people, from contemporary culture, to kind of bring that out for people who don't have that same background that I have. And so I invited her to come and do something in our barber shop and started to talk about this kind of symbolism of hair in art history, and she had already been invited to do something at DKUK, which is another barbershop that where people have their hair cut in front of a piece of art, and so that work was not at Mass. And instead of saying, okay, well, we can't do anything to do with hair at Finishing Touch, we talked about how that would develop. So the performance happened at Finishing Touch by candlelight, and then the publication, we did a small leaflet for that, and then the publication evolved from that. And we invited Beth Bramich to write the text for the publication because she had been at that performance at Finishing Touch, and had also worked with Holly in the past at Behind the Curtain at Tim Tyke.
Should we start talking about that research process? So, as Joyce describes, there's a theme around the hair. Yeah. Could you maybe start talking about how the hair connected to the images and the images, how you source those images?
Yeah, I think quite often when I research things, I'm doing it in a quite scattergun kind of way, or like a pick and mix, sneak shot kind of way. It's not like a linear process. So when I started making the performance for DKUK, I thought, okay, like let's think about characters whose hair is key in their narrative, and some kind of pop up instantly, like Samson and Delilah or Rapunzel, and then there's like Joan of Arc or Britney Spears when she shaved her head. And so from those kind of like first instinctive ones, they all led to other things. And then it's like finding correlations between the images of them. So similarities in the stories, but also pictorial similarities, like visual similarities.
Maybe that's a nice time to see one of the images.
Yeah, so this first image is just a quick one off the performance at DKUK, which I think some people here saw, which was a slideshow projected onto tracing paper on the outside of the salon. And I'm sitting in the back with the salon gown and a towel on my head, and I'm just like going through the slides almost as if I'm kind of trying to choose which look I'm going to go for at the hairdresser. It's like which persona or personality I might adopt. And I guess also it's kind of like punning on the idea of image projection, like physical image projection, but also conceptual image projection, like you're at the hairdresser and you're thinking about
Coming, doesn't it?
yeah. Getting extensions, I guess. Yeah. I guess I was like not entirely happy with the performance at DKK as a format. Like I was excited by the imagery, but I felt like it hadn't come alive enough. And so the piece at Finishing Touch uses the exact same slides, but instead of them being projected, they're passed around the audience with battery-powered candles. And each time I'm passing the slides, somebody I'm whispering something to them about the character in the image. And the thing that I'm whispering to them about the image is incorrect. So I might hand you an image of Joan of Arc and tell you that she lost all her hair because she was having chemotherapy, something like this. And then they're passed around the audience and there's this kind of Chinese whispers. So it has quite a somber mood because of the whispering and the low level light, but it also had this mischievous mood because people quite quickly saw the possibility for subverting what was going on and kind of deliberately saying the wrong thing or kind of getting the giggles at what they were hearing. So it had this kind of undercurrent of silliness as well as kind of sobriety, I suppose. And also it's important to say that normally in my performances I take on the guise of characters. I don't use found images like I embody the images rather than showing them. Yeah, so in a way the stories about the hair are important. Almost what's more important is how do these images circulate and how the stories kind of cross-pollinate one another.
Let's talk about the performance then, and the device of circulating images physically.
Yeah.
So when you were handing slides to people, they were passing around the circle, and you said that you whispered a message into their ear, but it was a part of the narrative, but it wasn't in the narrative of the slide that you were giving them.
Yeah.
So the images literally circulated around the room. What was important about the idea of that the possibility for the message to change?
I think for me it's analogous of how images move through art history. Mm-hmm. So everyone was like willfully mistelling the stories, which is totally fine. And it's nice when a work takes on a life of its own, you can direct it too much. So for me that felt like a kind of totally appropriate thing to happen.
If there's extracts of text from stories that you kind of boiled down wider understandings of these characters into these kind of snippets that could be confused.
And I deliberately kind of start them off wrong, with the wrong text, with the wrong image. And it's the same in the book. The images and the text are deliberately mismatched. And some of them you know that they're mismatched because you kind of know, like, that's Britney Spears and that text has nothing to do with her. And then from there, you can kind of extrapolate that probably all the other ones are incorrect as well. So I suppose I'm interested in like the images not being trustworthy. And in that sense, having the fake candles instead of real candles is a kind of pointer towards that as well.
Yeah. We could talk a little bit about this idea of how these connect to, so knotted masses of work connects to previous performances. So could you talk a little bit about how you use this term stage miracle in the past to describe how your performances work here, and this one is more like a ritual perhaps that you invite people into?
Yeah, so I suppose I've made quite a lot of works where, like this one's participatory, but I've made a lot of works where I'm doing something and people are looking at it rather than joining in with it. And I kind of refer to them as staged miracles because it's like I'm dressed up as a saint or something and I'm appearing in a high street window or in a bus shelter or something. And it kind of has the characteristic of like an apparition because it's unexplained if you're a member of the public who sees it. But it's obviously staged because it's obviously not a supernatural occurrence, just like a person in a costume. And the costumes tend to be, like there's a performance called Our Lady of Peckham where I dress up as the Virgin Mary in Peckham Rye. And the blue robe is like a duvet cover and you can see all the poplars down the side of the duvet cover. And so a bit like with the candles, there's always an indication that there's things pretending to be serious, but it's subverting itself at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And you've got this kind of particular way of presenting yourself in those situations. And I think the same way that you had in the ritual, where you're not someone that you can interact with in a kind of, you wouldn't have a conversation with you. You have a what we describe as a deadpan expression, which kind of makes the situation. Kind of gives it that kind of giddiness between what we're very seriously taking on what you're doing, but also it's not quite right. There's like little things that are off about the, like holding, as you say, the plastic candles, and not having the right information at the right time.
Yeah. So it's kind of on the one hand making out to be serious, and on the other hand undermining yourself, which I think again comes back to this thing of like. Having an image of something that's meant to be like sacred, for example, and not being able to trust that image, and also not being able to trust the thing that image is of, if that makes sense. So, for like a character like Mary Magdalene, there is like written historical source material about her, but it's all really old and it's all kind of part of a narrative that most people feel cynical about. but the imagery is really rich. So there's a kind of like distrust of the history, but kind of for me it is like a love of the imagery. And then I got interested in how Mary Magdalene gets kind of mixed up in art history with this other character, Mary of Egypt. So Mary Magdalene gets shown with really long hair because there's a mention of her in the Bible where she wipes Jesus' feet with her hair with oil. So she's shown with long hair, but then she gets kind of historically confused with Mary of Egypt, who's this woman that lives in the desert. And there's quite a few kind of desert characters that live out in the wilderness and they don't have any clothes, so they just have hair. And they're kind of semi-animal, semi-human. This is an Egyptian character called Berenice, who was painted a lot by this Italian Renaissance painter called Bernardo Strozzi. And actually, later than Renaissance, this is like 1644 or something, I think. And the story of her is that she cut off her hair as an offering to the goddess Aphrodite when her husband was away at war. So she offered her hair in the temple as a kind of protection for him that he would come home, or that he'd be victorious and come home safe. And he came home safe, and then the hair disappeared from the temple. And the sort of court priest interprets that the hair is now in the sky, and there's a constellation named after her. This one's a Hieronymus Bosch of a saint called, she's sometimes called Saint Wilgefortis and sometimes she's Saint Uncumber. And her story is that she was a Christian convert and her dad, who was a pagan, was trying to marry her off to another pagan king or something. And she prayed to be saved from the pagan marriage. And on the morning of the wedding, she awoke covered in hair. And the guy no longer wanted to marry her because she was kind of repulsive. And so she was saved from the marriage, but then her dad was so furious about it that he had her crucified. And it's hard to see on this projection, but in the painting she has like a sort of wispy beard. She doesn't have like full-on body hair, she's more like a sort of carnival bearded lady. And then this is like a very different kind of image of body hair. This one's just from last year, and it's a model called Ovida Bystrom, who received a lot of sort of intense hate for being in this Adidas campaign with hairy legs.
Can you maybe hold on this one for a second? Because
Yeah.
I think this is a nice one to talk about maybe a contemporary and then historical view of what it means to have or not have hair as a woman.
Yeah.
So we talk about hair removal, we talk about it in terms of sacrifice and growing hair to repel men.
Yeah.
But in terms of what it means to have a statement here, where body hair is part of the image that you're constructing, maybe there's something you could say.
Yeah, I guess there's like a kind of sense of like an empowerment in subverting the traditional way that a woman is supposed to look or not look. So in that sense, it's like having, again, it's this thing of having the agency or ownership, like deciding to not shave the legs as a kind of like, almost like an act of rebellion, which is kind of ridiculous because obviously the hair is totally natural. So it's interesting that the not removing it is considered unnatural. So I think a lot of the kind of vitriol that she got was like this idea that it's kind of disgusting and unfeminine.
So the reaction was about transgression.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. This is from a set of German playing cards, and this character is called the Animal Queen. And similarly to Mary of Egypt or Mary Magdalene, when they're shown with all the body hair, they always have their breasts exposed and quite often their knees. So they're kind of animal-like because they're almost like a sort of chimp or something. Also, interestingly, if you go to Moulin Rouge in Paris, a lot of the costumes are basically like a catsuit with holes for the breasts. So it's kind of really weirdly like got a life in that kind of costume making as well, which is very strange. But interestingly, the unicorn imagery goes a lot with the Virgin Mary because the unicorn is like this symbol of purity and it's kind of like rare and magical. So yeah, that's like an interesting example of how you get this chain. Then this guy, he's kind of connected to the Animal Queen in a sense because he's the wild man, and again he's from the Germanic part of Europe in like probably late medieval period, I think. Or well, there's loads of myths like him in Greco-Roman history as well. Like everyone's got a wild man character. Essentially, he's like a kind of shaman that lives outside of the civilization and lives in the wild and only wears leaves and hair, and nobody knows if he's an animal or a person and this sort of thing. This image in particular is from a costume from Nuremberg Shrove Tuesday celebrations. So it's a kind of like Mardi Gras dress-up thing. And I'm not exactly sure why he's carrying a small child on a stick. I think like maybe he's one of these kind of spirits that will spirit away naughty children, and that's kind of what's going on, but I don't know for sure. But like the not knowing for sure is kind of the point. And again, he's got the exposed nipples and knees and elbows. So I'm just, I guess I'm interested in how they will, they're like visual rumours, you know? So in the work, the whispering becomes like a rumour that passes around the room, and sort of art historically, the way these things like go off into tangents with each other, I feel is similar to the rumour making process. This one's Sex and the City. So this character Samantha, in like quite late on in the series, or one of the series, she develops cancer and she has a wig and she's doing like a motivational speech at a charity dinner for like other women that have cancer, and she's getting really hot and she eventually like goes fuck's sake or something and throws off the wig, and everyone cheers and throws off their wig as well, and it's like empowering in a sort of 90s way.
Yeah.
But I think also she's quite like Mo Molam, when Mo Molam famously would throw off her wig in the meetings for the Good Friday Agreement. And when I was making the performance in the book, I had this kind of back and forth about whether to include like real people or not. And some of the people in the book are definitely fictional and some of them are mythological, and very few of them are actually real. Like Britney Spears is an actual person, but she has like a kind of persona. Whereas I felt that putting Mo Molam in the book was like,
Step too far.
yeah, it didn't feel right. And I think also there's not like, those images aren't in popular circulation in the same way. So it's kind of important to say about the work that although the hair is like a key thread thematically, actually it's almost like a red herring, because what I'm more interested in is how these images circulate and how they relate to each other. So the Mo Molam images, like they're not in like popular currency, like the Britney Spears paparazzi images, which like maybe you have one, I'm not sure. It's like a sort of lucky dip, which is like the slides. So art historically, Samson and Delilah is kind of like a paparazzi shot that goes around because so many painters have painted it. And there's lots of different versions of it in the book. This one's Rubens. I suppose in the Samson images, he's having his hair cut off to remove his power. And I think this set of paparazzi shots were like it was like Britney Spears had lost her mind and she'd lost her like iconic power, and I think nobody expected her to be able to come back from it. And it's quite interesting that she did. So I suppose there's an element of like somebody doing something destructive to somebody else, and then somebody doing something self-destructive.
We've talked about that as a kind of self-iconoclasm. So either you have the autonomy, the agency of the hair removal, or someone else does. But in this case, even though she had the agency to remove it, she was photographed in a vulnerable moment where she did not have the power over how that image was consumed.
Yeah, and I think like she's quite almost like the pinnacle celebrity in terms of like relationship with her own mass media image and like control or loss of control of that. She's like peak that type of media frenzy. Or like one of the first people that lived had like their whole career in that really particular type of paparazzi weekly magazine era and internet era. I'd like to think it was like a super empowering thing that she did, but I don't think that it was.
When you wasn't given the opportunity to do that.
And then she just started wearing wigs straight away,
Yes.
which was disappointing. In my view.
Joan of Arc having her hair cut off as a kind of punishment before she was burned at the stake. I think, I suppose one of the main parts of the story of Joan of Arc that everyone remembers is that she dressed as a boy, and that's how she got into like military success. And so I think there's kind of an interesting thing of like she was already going around with short hair and she already looked androgynous. And then they cut her hair off more as a punishment. So it's kind of, I think there's something quite sort of strange about, in a way, that looks like she didn't mind not having long hair already. So they kind of like overdid it for her. It's a kind of act of violence. But actually there's also a kind of parallel stream of iconography where she gets shown with really long, like fair hair, like in this kind of maiden saint kind of tradition. Which, but I feel like the image that I associate more with her is this kind of, that she's kind of disguised as a boy. This is a still from Marina Abramovich's video work. Art must be beautiful, artists must be beautiful. And in case you haven't seen it, it's quite a long video, I think, where she is brushing her hair over and over again, quite ritualistically, and saying, art must be beautiful, artists must be beautiful. And the hair brushing gets kind of more and more like violent and kind of quite self-harming. But I think in relation to the Britney image, it's a similar thing of like subverting what a woman's expected to look like and the hair as part of that. And again, I think she's like one of those people that really attracts mythology, and she obviously has sort of generated that herself, like what, like, arguably sort of wants that and has like built it. Whereas we could probably assume that Mary Magdalene wasn't working on her like self-iconography in quite the same way, but she's like taken on that life.
Yeah, Cousin It. I don't really know like why Cousin It is like he is.
But that's the nice thing about, isn't it? They're a they.
Yeah.
In lots of ways, although it's left ambiguous completely in the narrative.
Yeah, and there's sort of, I guess, some sort of a body under there, but we don't know what it looks like. Yeah, maybe there isn't. But I suppose that's more into the territory of the uncanny. So when you have like St. Wilberfortis and she's got the beard and she's kind of uncanny or sort of unsettling, he's like a sort of pantomime equivalent of that. Like it's so exaggerated that it is just funny. But it's kind of from that like territory of like horror, like disembodied hair, it being disgusting, sort of thing.
The animal.
Yeah. But he's kind of like, yeah, sort of safe comedic version of that, I suppose. Yeah. This is sort of more romantic equivalent of Cousin It. This is so there's this character, a sort of folkloric or fairy tale character, two of them, Peleus and Melisandre's the woman, and she's like a kind of Rapunzel character, and there's various operas, like there's a Debussy opera about them, and it's the kind of forbidden love story where she's married to Peleus and then she falls in love with his brother. But there's this kind of scene where, oh no, maybe Peleus is the brother, I can't remember. There's a scene where, similar to Rapunzel, she's letting down her hair, but instead of him climbing up it, he's like wrapping himself in it in this kind of sensual frenzy. And in the Debussy opera, there's this kind of climactic part of the music that's when that moment is happening. And this is a photograph of somebody playing her in the opera, like a kind of, I guess, like stage, like press shot. Yeah. I don't know if it's real hair. Yeah. But I suppose if you cut off the top of that image, like, then it could just be Cousin It.
I wanted to maybe ask you, because you've just performed the wealth of knowledge that you've developed, so you are now a conduit for these stories.
Yeah.
And you keep reworking them. So you've had three, like the number has grown.
Yeah.
You've got more characters.
Yeah.
You've provided a way in through the slides and then given an order in the book. You've sort of said you can explore these, and I've put text and images together.
Yeah.
Could you maybe talk about the limitations of that collection? So it might be quite a Western canon.
it's definitely Western canon, and I think that's partly to do with like where my knowledge is, or where my I almost hesitate to call it knowledge because I just tried to tell the Pelleas and Melisandre story and like didn't remember it. So I mean, this is kind of thing of like being like a kind of keen amateur.
You could have styled that one.
But I feel like the keen amateurness is important, right? But then there's like a realm beyond that where where I'm completely uninformed and I don't feel that I have the knowledge or maybe the right to talk about. Like, I wouldn't want to talk about the politics of Afro hair, for example, because I just would feel completely out of my depth and I wouldn't want to, like, get something terribly wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not my experience to talk about. Whereas, like, this kind of, I guess, like, Hellenic Christian kind of narratives is more, like, part of my own upbringing.
I also wonder if it comes from having performed these roles and embodied these
Yeah.
characters at certain points.
It's about, I guess, in a way, it's about like identifying to some extent with some of them. I'm not saying that I necessarily identify with that exactly.
This is your next performance.
Yeah,
surely.
but yeah, like in the sort of body of works like leading up to this or around that same time, like a lot of the imagery that I'm working with is kind of Christian saints or Greco-Roman deities and like dressing up as them, performing as them, and kind of performing as imagining that performing as them is a way of invoking them or kind of channeling them. So in a way, the whispering the stories is another way of like revivifying them.
So going back to that idea of the miracle, the hair is involved in their narrative is a kind of a moment of intervention. It's the kind of thing that changes, that allows the story to either, and it doesn't really improve Joan of Arc's story.
Yeah, it doesn't. Well, it sort of temporarily improves things with her, but then it obviously ends pretty badly with the crucifixion. But yeah, there's a kind of sense, at least in some of them, that the hair is like not only just like their attribute, but their kind of, like it could change the course of their story a bit.
Because I'm thinking a little bit about morality, because there's an element where women seem to get quite regularly punished in these stories.
Yeah.
And hair is used as a tool of punishment, or they are punished for it. I'm just sort of thinking through what these saints what's still relevant and important for you about these stories of saints. Why do we keep them alive?
Well, that's like a key question, really. I think I suppose it's almost like the desire to have something that you could look to that would be empowering in some way, but at the same time undermining that because of acknowledging that it's not real, it's not true, like it's not empowering. Like there's not. I don't believe in praying to St. Olga Fortis if I'm in a bad relationship or something, which some people do.
Yeah.
So I suppose it's almost like the want of that. And also this idea of like, which version could you trust? Is there an authentic version and how would you find it? Like that interests me a lot. But I think in terms of the punishment thing, there's also like another kind of side section of people cutting off their hair as an act of grief. So there's certain biblical passages that are about cutting off your hair as a way of like starting again. But then conversely, there's characters who never cut their hair as a way of signifying that they're holy. So I've never really worked out how those two kind of reconcile with each other. But I suppose cutting off your hair, if you were bereaved, would be like a way of symbolising and making visual the loss. So, which I suppose there's like a kind of contemporary version of with people's hair falling out if they're having chemotherapy. And it's like a kind of visible signifier of the sort of trauma, if you like. And then the sort of hope of it regrowing.
And the authenticity of removing your wig that's pissing you off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could be my favourite one. My favourite one is the story of leg hair denoting that a person could fly.
So there's one theory that about the development of the iconography of the body hair women, like Mary Magdalene and Mary of Egypt, and various other. You quite often see angels with body hair all covered in feathers, and there's a school of thought which says that iconography developed not from painting or these kind of religious prints, but actually that it developed from costume in like miracle plays, or pageantry. So if you were a character who could fly, you would have feathered tights on, or kind of hairy tights, and that this, like, I suppose again was like a key, like an idea that you were animal, but that you were also otherworldly, and that you had this kind of supernatural power. So, as well as having wings, a lot of them have either a feathered body or a hair body, and the two seem kind of interchangeable.
All the classical stuff, I kind of like self-taught by being, reaching a certain age and being like, oh, maybe I'll read some Ovid, and then finding all these characters in there, and then going like, okay, Ovid's got the story of a big flood followed by a kind of rainbow in the sky that's a sign from the gods, and that is exactly like the Noah story. And then kind of going, what's the original source of these things, if there's an original, like, if there's a version of that story in lots of different cultures, which there is, it kind of suggests the idea of an authentic, like, event that everyone's then kind of generated rumours from. But for me, the idea, like the total failure of being able to find the original and true version is important, like acknowledging the failure. So in George Eliot's book Middlemarch, there's this character who's trying to write a book called The Key to All Mythologies, and he thinks that he can like categorise all pagan myth in relation to Christianity as a way of like disproving paganism, effectively. But he really believes that he can categorise all myths and know all of them. And it's completely hilarious. And totally the opposite of my approach. Like, I really want to do a show called Key to All Mythologies, but it would be kind of like an ironic title. Like, the complete failure, the complete impossibility, but the fun of like delving into it anyway is kind of more where I'm coming from.
Yeah, it seems to spark up a lot. It seems to spark those associations for you between the different histories that you're tracking. This sort of process of building up this kind of personal iconography for yourself and finding these roots.
Yeah, I think so. It's like an associative kind of spider diagram kind of thing, but it's also like there's a performance that I first made in 2011 called Collapsing Deities that you talk about in the book, that where I have this bag of props and costumes, and it's like this kind of dressing up box of iconography. And I think, that sense of like a patchwork, or like a scraps bag of patchwork is similarly what I'm doing with this.
There's a movement sometimes how you talk about your work in terms of embodying characters, but also this idea of quotation. So thinking about what the guise is, what the kind of image is, and how you can quite quickly shortcut to representation of that particular figure.
Yeah.
So could you, in that work, Collapsing Deities, I think you do that in the way that you have contemporary items, and you're sort of thinking about maybe how people might recognise certain things, and then you can kind of remind people of you can kind of link back to further, more distant or more obscure figures.
Yeah.
So is there that kind of intention, you kind of want to bring up the obscure but also kind of connect to the popular?
Yeah, I suppose there's recognisable products like Venus razors or Mars bars or something that you kind of forget that they are named after these kind of Greco-Roman characters, and it's quite interesting to flatten that chronology and put the two things next to each other. And in terms of like a symbolic language, if you want to dress up as Venus, in some ways just holding up a packet that says Venus on it is kind of the easiest like shortcut to that. And also I think often in paintings of saints, they're holding an object that is like the language to tell you which saint they are. So like John the Baptist having a head on a plate or something. But it's really similar to the kind of gestures of advertising. Like he's trying to sell you the head on playfulness. So holding up the Venus packet is like simultaneously selling it but also like labelling.
I also wondered if you could talk a little bit about the idea of just that idea of the standards in a little bit more about the idea of the props and rituals and how you made these kind of DIY.
Did you say standards?
Standards,
Yeah. So mostly like any time that I'm using a prop, it's a sort of like fan version of an original, if the original ever existed. And I like the idea of something being a stand-in for a stand-in for a stand-in, and then they're all a stand-in for something that may or may not be there. So there's that kind of collapse of like trust. And that, I think the doubt is really important. And I want the objects to kind of point at that doubt. So again, like the fake candles, or seeing an image partly because you're just looking at a candle, like not having the concrete sure knowledge.
Because the slides become quite precious within the performance. They're handed on kind of almost devotionally.
Yeah.
They move around the space. They become part of the ritual.
Yeah.
But they are also, as you said, are kind of copies of versions. So
Yeah, they're just reproductions.
So they hold a limited amount of information there that needs to be expanded by the experience.
Yeah, I think that sort of activation in the performance or the storytelling is like what brings them alive.
There's a lot of women in the performance, and there's maybe there's this idea of the relationship particularly with women and hair. That
Yeah.
you kind of drawn out here.
Yeah.
When you were kind of putting that together, did you feel like you wanted to focus on women relationship with hair? I mean, there are certain different moments in that where the genders, there's a few male figures, but you have maybe more of an interest in women and hair.
Yeah, I was thinking about this week actually, and I'm thinking about how, in a way, I feel like there's something more. I'm probably making a massive generalisation, but I feel like there's something more susceptible to myth making about women, because for so much of history, people have said stuff about us rather than us saying it about ourselves, if that makes sense. So I think that there's this kind of potential for projection, and in fact, actually, that's kind of one of the reasons that I started out with working with slides in this body of work, is this idea of the projected image and the projected story. So, yeah, I feel like there's something about thing of like overlaying something over a person.
Yeah.
So like Joan of Arc, the historic person, plus like the court documents about her trial and all the history books written about her and all the films made of her. You're always like at a remove from her. And there is some documentation, like the transcript of the trial as a historic document survives, but obviously it's written by the people who tried her. So although I think there are some quotes of things that she said, I think, they're not, I don't know, she doesn't have agency in them.
Yeah, because they're reported differently at the time, so it's not first
Yeah.
hand account.
So I feel like there's something about wanting to try to give back agency, which again is impossible, but it's kind of like fun to test out.
Enthusiasm for this symbolism, this iconography that you can read, how do you expect audiences to kind of enter into that with you?
Well, sometimes when I've done more kind of dressing up performances, people have said to me afterwards, oh, I guessed when you were Atlas, or I could tell when you were so-and-so, but there were loads of other ones that I didn't know. And then that's where the playfulness comes in, because I can invent some and slip them in there. Nobody knows which ones are like real. But then none of them are real, or none of them are, you know, like a historical, factual person. Yeah. So I suppose what I want is to invite the audience into that playfulness, or into that kind of that, I guess, that kind of just that visual lexicon. And I like the idea that of like this kind of lost art of being able to read these images, because I suppose the idea is a lot of the, particularly like the stained glass, those images existed for people who were in church that couldn't read, and like theoretically the lay person would be able to look at them and go, oh, that's John the Baptist because he's holding a plate with a head on it. And lots of us now don't know those things. So it's like a kind of trying to find, like, it's almost like a dead language and trying to learn to speak it again, I suppose.
And do you expect people to learn things from your performances, or is it more that you're pointing at things that you could find out more about?
I think I'm pointing at things, and sometimes I'm deliberately pointing the wrong way. I'm not really like trying to be educational in that sort of direct sense.
But you think that these images are important and should be returned to?
I just find some of them like so weird that they're really interesting. Like that woodcut of a hairy woman in the sky is just kind of bonkers. Like, and I feel like a lot of them feel quite surrealist. Like somebody with a head on a plate, if you don't know the story, it's kind of gross or macabre or something. And so I think often the aesthetic they have, without knowing the kind of story of where they, like, how they develop, if you just could ever see them just like as an image and not know anything about them, which obviously you can't do, there would be a kind of, I just find them really sort of, I just like all these weird subcategories, like the green man or the boy on a stick. Like I don't know why he's got a boy on a stick, but it's a great image, you know. And then it's like going, oh, and he's like this one, and then like going to Moulin Rouge and going like, oh my god, they've all got holes cut out. It's just weird, and I really wish I could have had an image of that, but they are incredibly strict. No, there's no images anywhere of them. So I can like just generate the rumour by telling you all, and you have to believe me.
You're saying about this kind of transfer of images seems to be the key thing. I mean, it makes me think of that A.B. Warburg Mnemosyne Atlas, and this idea that there's images that are just in the culture that transmit or transfer and leak. Like this idea that the church takes on the footprint of the temple in order to keep going.
Exactly.
So is it partly that you're trying to sustain, or I don't know whether it's sustain or resuscitate or some other verb, these images within Christianity, particularly by observing how they've landed in pop culture?
I think I'm definitely interested in the idea of resuscitating an image, but I don't know that it's not with like an agenda to like specifically with the religious narratives.
Because they've clearly kept going. I mean, culture has drawn them in for some purpose beyond the particular historical meaning they have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think then there's an argument for kind of Jungian archetypes where like every culture's got a mother goddess, for example, or something like that. And the idea that the images are in a kind of collective unconscious and that they're sort of finding their way out.
Mm.
So you could be like, what if there was a collective unconscious for the image of the woman with the shaved head, and in the 1300s it manifested as Joan of Arc, and then in 2007 it manifested as Britney Spears, and like in another 200 years it might come out again.
Yeah.
And like maybe it's being repressed and it has to sort of break loose.
Yeah. When does it jump species, or when does it mutate?
Yeah. So then it's like just kind of like, I suppose, somehow getting involved in a small way in that process. Or just like enjoying observing it as well.
About writing the text, the lines that go with the images.
Yeah.
What's the process behind that?
I think that when I was making the performance, the sentences were just like forming themselves in my mind by researching the characters and the stories.
So you just made them.
So I was just like boiling them down into sentences, and then when I was about to make the performance, I was like, okay, I've got like however many of these sentences in my mind, like roughly ready to go, but there wasn't a script in terms of which image I was going to give out with which sentence or anything like that. Like I never choreograph things or I never script things. And then equally I didn't like record the audio combinations at all. And I didn't, like, in the course of the performances the rumours kind of come back to me and I can pronounce these kind of like ridiculous results that they made, and I didn't document any of those, so they're not in the book. But when I compiled the text and the images in the book, they are just kind of like thrown together, or they're kind of playfully put together, like the text about the hairy legs meaning you can fly, like I kind of had to put it with this picture. You know, some of them just work together instinctively. There's also a text that's at the start of the performance and at the start of the book, which is kind of bastardized from a biblical passage about shaving off your hair and scattering it in the wind, and like dividing it with scales and scattering a third to the wind and burning a third and doing something with a sword, the rest of it. So there's a kind of appropriated, sort of mistranscribed version of that at the start of the performance and the start of the book. It's almost like a kind of scene setter. The idea of doing something ritualistic with your hair is kind of some kind of like cleansing ceremony or something.
Talking about circulation of images being kind of key, the idea in the hair is like a red herring.
Yeah.
Is it, why was it stories of hair that you wanted to use as a way to talk about circulation? Like, could it have been something else, or was it?
Yeah, I suppose it could have been, and it was just like kind of a playful response to making work in a hair sound like,
Yeah.
oh, I'll do something with
Yeah.
hair, just like as a
Yeah,
way
yeah,
in, kind of sit like almost like stupid, like
Yeah.
I'll do something slight specific, I'll do it about hair, and then that just became, yeah, like the key to the door of all these other things.
But it's interesting that it's because there's such a lot of research then around the stories.
Yeah.
That it's kind of led into that. And
Yeah.
then in your other performances, how you use different props and things, I suppose the hair becomes like just another prop and key.
Yeah, I think so. And I often make work in a site-specific way, so I'm not trying to kind of do that down. Like, that is important to me. But in the sense of doing something in the salon and go, I'll do it about hair.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, that's just like a way in, I suppose. Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.